Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you know by now, I'm a pharmacist, I'm an attorney at the Kulkarni law firm, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have a think about drugs, a wonder about medical devices, if you consider cannabis or you obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I'd love for you guys to actually subscribe, leave a comment, because these podcasts take a lot of time to sort of create and talk, but they're a lot of fun. So if you are enjoying it as much as I am, love to have you keep joining us. So please subscribe. You can always reach me at Darshan Talks on Twitter. Go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our podcast today, this is actually exciting because I've actually had this guest on before. I'm very, very excited. And she is changing the role of pharmacy in more ways and more places than you can think. We had a conversation about that last time. It still remains true today, in fact, more so. So if you are wondering, what does the modern pharmacy do? What does the modern pharmacist do? And how is the world changing? Probably are going to care about today's discussion. So our guest today, I don't even know what her new title is because apparently there are role aspects that are changing for her. So we're going to ask her about that. She has had a major role in causing litigation and advising people on the emerging role of pharmacists. So our guest for today, Erin Fox. Hey, Erin, how are you?
Good to see you.
It's good to see you. So just before we got on, you talked a little bit about how things are evolving for you. So what are you up to nowadays?
So, still have my fingers in drug shortages, drug safety, but I have some new roles. So I'm really excited. Our pharmacy informatics team reports up to me, as well as our safety and quality person. And then, our chief pharmacy officer has taken a new role. And so my colleague and I are splitting. We're doing co-interim duties. And so it's really exciting to have the opportunity in this new challenge.
So let's talk about that, because you're talking about splitting the duties of a chief pharmacy officer. Before we go into that, you said your former boss is changing roles. Where does a chief pharmacist officer go next?
So Linda Tyler, she's been a mentor of mine. She's going to be ASHP president, but she is deciding to kind of take a break and focus a little bit on that. And she'll be part-time at our College of Pharmacy, doing some teaching that she really loves. But I think being ASHP president is probably going to keep her pretty busy.
I would imagine so. The reason I thought that was interesting is because whenever I am, at least working my way through pharmacy school, I always thought of the CPO as the absolute tippy top you can go to. So but then I know that pharmacy itself has been evolving so much, with a lot of tech companies saying, you know what, pharmacists actually engage with patients more than even physicians do, and there's an opportunity here. So I didn't know if the role of a CPO has been evolving and has been changing, and she's sort of trying into that. It sounds like she's going to lead a lot of that change. But here's my question to you. In your role as interim CPO, how do you see the changes that are coming down, and does that affect what you do on a day-to-day basis?
I think one of the things that I'm excited about and that I love about working at an academic medical center is the opportunity to work a little more closely with some of our physicians to really on some not only just cost savings measures, but safety measures too. And so, over the years, I've been, had the opportunity to work with so many different types of physicians. And I think with this new role, it gives me a little more strategic way to maybe make things happen a little bit more quickly.
So you talk about being in basically working with physicians, which is a very clinical role. You talk about cost, you talk about safety. Obviously, a lot of these have been handled in many ways, and it's sort of pharmacies operated. But as you come in, what is the first thing you focused on? And then what is the first thing your co CPO, if you will, focused on?
In a way, a lot of what we've been doing hasn't changed that much. In part because we did have opportunities before, when our boss was maybe traveling a little bit more, but before COVID, she would give us the opportunity to split up her meetings and things like that. So some of the roles are familiar, but others are a little less so.
Okay.
We are working through new goals for our pharmacy department for this year. So getting the kind of the strategic roadmap from our C-suite, with and then thinking about how we connect to those goals.
So how do you go about making a strategic roadmap? Is it really something that the C-suite just goes, and we need you to do this? Or is it a negotiation? And I recognize to a certain extent everything's a negotiation, but if you are weighing it, is it really the hospital's going, academic medical center, to be more accurate, is going, these are the things we really need to happen? So how does that get weighed? How does that even play itself out?
Yeah, so I haven't gotten to be at the table for those super high level discussions, but here at our organization we have kind of three main goals. So we have patient experience, we have safety and quality, and we have financial strength. And so really, each year the roadmap for what we want to focus on really does fall within those buckets. You could be a frontline pharmacist and think, well, those things don't have that much meaning to me. But we think about, well, one goal this year is to help with our patient throughput. How do we help our discharge process and get patients discharged more quickly so that we can have room for folks coming out of the OR. And pharmacists have a big role there in that discharge process. So how can we even work 2 to 3 days ahead at the time of admission to set them up well for a good discharge at the end of their stay?
That is so interesting to me, because one of the things I was going to ask you when you said your 3 goals are patient experience, safety and quality, and financial strength, my first thought was, wait, no clinical. That's the first thing I would have thought every academic medical center would be focusing on. And the way you answered that to me was interesting, because you basically said clinical just permeates all three.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
If we're not taking good clinical care of our patients, then we can't exist. So it really that clinical has to be at the top.
Now, is that because you're an academic medical center, or do you think like the smaller hospitals that are out there are going, you know what, we're really in the business of dispensing, and we need to make sure that the drug goes out from the pharmacy, gets to the patient bedside as quickly as possible? Like, do you think it's a difference in perspective, or is it just that's where the practice of pharmacy is right now?
I hope that's where the practice of pharmacy is right now. I have not had the opportunity to work outside of actually this organization, so I'm very inbred that way. I try to expand. I try to expand my network and try to learn as much as possible. But that day-to-day exposure, I've worked here for almost 25 years. So yeah.
Okay. So that really raises the next question to me. When you talk about financial strength, and you talk about safety and quality, as you know, I do a lot of work with life sciences companies as well. And one of the things that pops up is this idea of medical affairs, and they're supposed to be helping hospitals and pharmacists and physicians hopefully do a better job in terms of telling them about their drugs and sort of educating them. Here's my question. And I'll sort of speak to it on multiple levels. As a pharmacist, I did 20 years of pharmacy in multiple hospitals. I can count on one hand the number of times I've met a person from medical affairs, and that was always because either the hospital didn't think it was appropriate for us to meet them. I was more frontline. That just wasn't my role. It could have been a variety of things. But from your perspective, from your vantage point, how often have you utilized that as a resource?
That's a good question. And I know the medical affairs folks are not always focused on sales, or
Yeah,
they're not supposed to be.
that's going to
Um,
be my next question, but yes.
but it often does seem, and I've had a mixed bag. I've talked to companies that do a good job, that are willing to listen, to understanding that you might have restriction criteria for a new product. You might not want to roll out your product 100%. You might want to do some pilots, do some education. There are companies that understand that process. There are also companies that kind of come in with a party line that say, you should switch this right now for all of your patients, and they don't understand even just some of the challenges in making a switch in an academic medical center, and how much effort and time that takes.
So what I'm hearing you say is that some companies are educated and sort of what's the word? I forget what the right term for it is, but smart enough to recognize that this is a process. Others are, this is the party line, and you will all switch over because our overlords are telling you that that is what must happen. And obviously, the ones who lose out are probably the second group, mostly because it's not easy to do that, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
But let me ask you a second version of that, which is something you hinted at, which I think is brilliant, which is my perspective when I was a pharmacist in hospitals was that anyone from industry is quote unquote tainted, for lack of a better term. So to me, the meeting of a sales rep versus a medical affairs person is the same thing. Truth is, as you pointed out, that's not true. But that was the perspective, at least when I did it. A, is that still the perspective? B, is that perception evolving, or is there just lack of education on that? How does that play out?
I think this perspective is changing a little bit, but it really does vary company by company. You can talk to medical affairs folks who are physicians or pharmacists or have a good clinical background and they really understand it. Sometimes you end up talking to PhDs who are brilliant and they can tell you everything about the pharmacology of a product, but they just look at you like you're speaking a different language when you talk to them about time it might take to make an epic order set and get things built properly and for a smart pump, things like that. So it's variable.
It's variable. Okay, fair enough. So I find that perspective valuable. So thank you for that. Let me ask you a different version, a different set of questions, going back to your original three. You talked about the patient experience. You talked about safety and quality. You talked about financial strength. Those are your three sort of goals you go for. What I also want to talk about is the drug shortages piece that came in. And one of the things that keeps coming up, and as I have more and more conversations, is the idea of, and we've done this for literally decades, but drug compounding. As in your new role, how do you view drug compounding, either internally if you're making a product or externally? And is there a difference in perspective, if you will? So let's start with the first. That was a compound question. Internally, when you're compounding for shortages that you might have, how do you handle that? How do you perceive that? And do you think that it should be manufacturers making it, or do you think that for the most part we've got the quality down at the hospital level?
So I think it's variable. I will tell you that, which is such a cop-out.
Are you sure you're not a lawyer? It depends.
I did think about going to law school at one time. No, I think so. So for our organization, we've invested a tremendous amount of money and time and training and people resources into being able to compound well, whether that's just day-to-day compounding and mixing things, or if we're trying to kind of get through a shortage. So we devote a tremendous amount of work there. So I feel like we're in good shape on that end. In general, though, unless it's something where we're trying to maybe split up a vial into multiple doses, we're not doing high risk compounding, powder to liquid, to get through a shortage. We are much more likely to use an alternative, use a more expensive product if we need to, just because that's not our expertise. So yeah.
So that's kind of interesting to me. So what you said is you try to avoid, you just rather switch products because of the risk it poses. Do you, again, I'm asking you, I'm speaking to you not in your role as an interim CPO at your hospital, but just in general as a pharmacist. Do you think some hospitals don't have the budgets, therefore they are taking on those greater risks? And how do you advise them at a pharmacist level on how to address those concerns or their thoughts around shortages? Because they still have to, they have the same problems, but not the budget to fix it.
Sure. Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think about an example in my head of the sodium bicarbonate injection shortage. Okay, so simple to compound, right? We have the raw materials. But should you go down that road? In our case, we really decided we're not going to compound it. We're going to conserve a little bit, and then we're going to use alternatives. I think if you don't have the resources, that's when you might want to start looking at an outside compounding pharmacy, especially if you don't have the. Sometimes it's just a tremendous amount of capital. If you need to get new clean rooms, new hoods. If your organization doesn't have that money to invest, it doesn't matter if you have the knowledge if you don't also have the equipment. And so, for those folks, I would definitely recommend looking into outsourcing.
So you talk about outsourcing. You talk about, because you're right. In retrospect, that's the most obvious solution, right? Go to someone who actually has those, and maybe you pay a little bit more for it, but it gets you to where you need to be right now. Two questions out of that. My first question is, when you have these shortages, you obviously try to adjust for it by compounding, which takes a lot of effort and money and stuff like that to do. Has that affected reimbursement at all, as far as you can tell?
Not that I can tell, and because the majority of the shortages that we face where we probably would compound are in the inpatient setting, where in most cases you're getting reimbursed on that DRG bundle. And so it's not really where you're going to have to ask for a prior authorization to allow for a compounded drug that way. So I haven't seen it impact reimbursement that way.
I guess the question I was wondering is, has there been any discussion or any kind of lobbying around the cost of the DRG bundle itself being increased because of adjustment to the actual processes it takes to deliver on that DRG bundle? But what I'm hearing you say is not yet.
I haven't seen it yet, but I think we need to do it. And not just, not really focusing in on that very specific example of compounding, but thinking about how did we get into a situation where so many generics, where the price has just been driven so low? A big part of that incentive is that hospitals have a very really slim margins on those DRGs, and so they're trying to buy the lowest cost products. And as the cost gets lower and lower, the manufacturers don't have the money to reinvest in quality, and so then we end up with poor quality products, recalls, shortages.
So you talk about poor quality products, recalls, and shortages, which I think is 100% part of the problem. So if that's true, our alternative is either you make it in-house to adjust for it, or you go to a compound like a 503A or a 503B who might make it for you. I guess my question for you at that point is, how do you choose a external vendor who can do it at a really high quality, but we know that manufacturers cannot meet that same quality? So how do you sort of reconcile that?
It's so hard. It's so hard. We absolutely need more information on that. You can look on FDA's website and you can see the inspections, but you never see the loop. There's no closure to know if the manufacturer really did fix the things that FDA suggested they fix. All you have is their word for it. So yeah, I think it is very, very difficult. I think certainly, professional organizations and GPOs often have different guidances to help organizations try to make a choice for an outsourcer, you could go visit. But again, if you don't have the skill set to know what to look for, it might look like a great place. I knew people that, had visited some of the compounding agencies that have been closed, and they thought things looked great. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky.
So I think that's exactly right. It's so tricky. When you're making these decisions, how do you choose your preferred outsourcing facility, if you will? Do you? It's and please correct me if I'm wrong. What I heard you say was that what should happen is that you should audit them, but you may not have the resources, you may not have the expertise. So what do you do right now? Do you sort of just go, we look at the FDA and we hope that they're doing a good job and base it on that, or what's your process?
So, and this is going to sound terrible, but because we spend so much resources to in-source, we actually don't purchase from an outsourcing company at all. So
that's really interesting.
So we just don't. I think, if we did, certainly we would have to, we would try to look at all the available information. But in our case, we've put kind of all our eggs in our own insourcing basket and really tried to, keep all of our equipment, all of our people, everything at the highest level we can.
So let's address that then, because that sounds fascinating that you've actually managed to pull it all in-house. I mean, I thought at least the opioids is something you'd be buying from outside, but it sounds like you guys have figured this piece out. So how do you maintain quality? And just to be clear, this is a general perspective. This does not represent your current facilities or anything like that. So if FDA are listening, and that is not what this represents. So when you're looking at and maintaining the quality within your internal compounding pharmacy, how do you ensure that it meets the highest quality? What is your process?
Yeah, so you definitely got to devote resources to it, and that's people, as well as some kind of a tracking system. Are you doing all the cleaning? Are you doing all of the testing? Are you doing everything to meet 797? We just at our facility, we actually have a full-time technician devoted to literally just making sure that we are compliant with all of our 797 measures. That is their entire job. And so, certainly they're working in collaboration with a lot of other folks, but if you don't have the people resources and you're not willing to put that time into it, you also have to have some relationships with other companies, as far as, sending samples out for sterility testing, stability testing. You've got to do that as well. And so, managing all of that, again, takes the resources and time. And so that's, to me, how you would set up a system of having quality is first and foremost being willing to invest in the resources it would take.
So obviously what it sounds like is if I was starting if I had my own academic medical center, or if I was a small hospital and I wanted to start something like this, it starts by getting a buy-in from your C-suite, if you will, and saying, look, this is going to be helpful. At the very least, it's going to be helpful for our patients because we'll be able to meet their needs. The second part of that same question will then be, we also think it'll save you money, because let's be honest, they aren't going to give you this if you can't save the money. So if that's true, you need to come up with a budget. So how do you go about getting that budget? And obviously I'm speaking in general terms, but do you go about by saying, look, this is what our competitors have done. This is what we had consultants come in and give us a pricing, or do you sort of go, we have internal expertise and we've done this for dog years, and we think this is what we think at minimum it'll cost us based on our own experience. So do you use consultants or do you use outside vendors, and sort of how do you build that base of support?
I think you can use a combination, depending on where your C-suite is at. I think you can also talk about just the general regulatory guidance that you're required to follow, even if you don't intend to compound for shortages or do some extensive compounding where you might outsource that. You're still going to need some level of equipment and expertise unless you intend to waste a lot of product. And so you can talk about that ROI you might get on not wasting product, being able to do it yourself. I think you also can talk a little bit about the regulatory uncertainty of the outsourced companies. You could say, well, here are two options. This is what we know. These are the items that we could be in control of. These are the potential risks if we outsource. There will be unknowns. There will be things that you cannot control. And so I think kind of laying those options out for your C-suite so that they can make an informed decision if they want to invest the resources is probably the best way to do it.
Okay, so you've got the buy-in. You then probably have to construct the SOPs that go along with it. You have to construct create the specific quality measures you're gonna use. How often do you end up auditing yourself?
Oh gosh, we do audits monthly to make sure that we're following. And then I can think at our organization. We are DNV instead of Joint Commission. And so they come every year. And so it's just kind of a constant readiness. But we also have to be prepared that our Board of Pharmacy could come in at any time as well and audit to 797. So it's more of a constant readiness, and in a way, I think the academic and medical center helps you with people being okay with those audits. Everyone's used to learning and kind of being tested, and it's just this is a part of what we do. If you can kind of ingrain those audits into your culture, then I think that helps set you up for success.
So do you find, and again, I'm not going to pick on any organization, do you find that some organizations that audit you are better suited for that role than other organizations? And if so, do you think that it makes sense to have a more centralized process of doing that in terms of external organizations auditing you for the function?
I think I love the lawyer answer, but I think it depends. It depends on I think you need to pick the auditing strategy that best fits your organization. Is it do you have like at our organization, we actually have external to our department, but internal to our organization, people who are, ISO trained auditors that can come in and do that. But if your organization doesn't have that, then it might make sense to outsource it. But it would be important to choose an auditing company that has the experiences to match your experiences. If someone is only used to auditing a very small community hospital, you wouldn't want to send them in to a very large oncology clean room.
I guess I'm sorry. I should have been clearer. I was referring primarily to government organizations or quasi-government organizations. Do you find that a state board of pharmacy / a JCO / a name the other organization that go along with it, are they all equally qualified in your experience to audit pharmacies? And that's why I don't want to name which specific organization, because that can be problematic. Sure. But overall, what has your experience been with that?
I think it's variable because sometimes you'll get people that are very experienced and may have come from, this is a new role for them. They come from a past role of working in a hospital. You can also get auditors who are very inexperienced. And so it depends.
Do you find yourself educating them? And do you find part of your role is not just educating them on what you do, but what pharmacies do? And what I'm specifically thinking of is, let's say the FDA walked through the door. When I talk to my clients, one of the things they talk about is FDA looks at us as essentially a manufacturer. They don't understand the functioning of a pharmacy. And we struggle with not just explaining that, no, we recognize we do batches, but but this is in a very different format, different scenario. And how does that play out for you overall? Is what I'm really sort of trying to figure out.
I don't know. I think there's a good balance. It's almost like being in a deposition, right? Do you want to say too much, or do you want to just answer the question? I think you can try to educate, but it may backfire, or it just may fall on deaf ears, because they're really not, if they have a set of tasks that they're going to check off, they can't change those tasks no matter how much you want them to, or educate them. So
makes sense. I do want to be respectful of your time. We usually aim for these to be about 20 minutes or so, 20, 30 minutes. We're already over. So based on our discussion, if you were going to ask our audience a question, what question would you ask them?
I would love to know how they pick an outsourcing pharmacy. I'm fascinated now. I'm fascinated with this topic.
Sounds perfect. So the question for the audience is, if you are a pharmacist or you are a hospital or the like, how do you pick your outsourcing facility? Awesome. We are going to ask you 2 rapid fire questions. This month, what challenged you?
Thinking about having a new role, having new reports to me. That is a challenge.
Okay. And this week, what was the best part of your job?
This week, I got to be in our vaccine clinic again. So that's always the best. That's the best.
Huh. I'm surprised. I keep hearing that vaccine clinics are so busy and difficult. And you that's your favorite part of your week. I'm trying to reconcile those two.
It's really fun because we at our large clinic that we have at our main hospital, it's all volunteers, different staff. So you get to see anesthesiologists, you get to see nurses that you may or may not have seen for years in some cases. It's fun to see people in person, and get to talk with them. And then it's really fun to see the excitement on patients' faces when they know they're getting their shot. Some are nervous, but we do a lot of, congratulations, it's nice.
That's awesome. So just to sort of bring this all together, we talked a little bit about your change in roles to being a chief pharmacist officer. We talked about the priorities that come along with it, which has included shortages, safety, informatics, safety and quality, and how you're basically splitting your duties with your chief pharmacist officer. You talked about what does a CPO sort of graduate into, and that becoming the ASHP president. Not too shabby. Then we talked about just what does the role of a CPO include, which includes things like working with physicians, managing costs, safety. We talked a little bit about medical affairs, and we talked about the perspective and the evolving perspective around medical affairs. Then we talked about compounding, and we talked about what is the perspective on whether we're insourcing or we're outsourcing. We talked about in your role, in your specific hospital, you talked about patient experience, safety and quality, and financial strength, all being the driving factors. And obviously, the thing that struck out to me is clinical sort of flows through all of them. We talked about one of the difficulties in terms of using outsourcing facilities, and you talked about just the FDA does audits, but you don't really know what actually happened at the end of them. You talked about some of the advice that's given by GPOs and the like. You talked a little bit also around how you actually insourced everything and why you did that, what choices you made, and the testing and the sterility and stability testing that you really need to get into just to make all of that happen. I think that covers it. Did I miss anything?
Great summary. Always a great conversation with you. Thank you.
Erin, thank you so much. This was so much fun. It was a pleasure having you on. Let's hope to get you back on soon again.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.